Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fiscal year 23 Q3 SEC section strategy review. Today, we're going to walk you through some recent updates to our org structure and a summary of increased investments across the section. And then we'll also walk you through what we've delivered over the last couple of quarters and what's coming up over the next couple of quarters in terms of product functionality. Next slide, please. So I want to start off by highlighting a realignment that we just completed at the beginning of September. As many of you know, we deprecated two categories within Protect earlier this year. Those categories were container network and container host security. And we did that so that we could focus the Protect team's efforts on the areas of our product that were gaining the most traction with users. So that meant focusing on container scanning and on our policy engine. And we've continued to see increased interest and really urgent customer need around giving users visibility and control over both their security findings and their compliance requirements in a more holistic way. And we've also seen just a tidal wave of customer need around software supply chain security, even though it's a broad topic with many moving pieces across the entire SDLC. For a lot of folks right now, supply chain security is very much about managing upstream dependencies. And that's the first thing that many people are really grappling with. So we know that we needed to invest more there as well. So as a result, we've established the governance stage to focus on exactly that. Establishing this stage comes with a handful of organizational changes, which you can see summarized here. That's the previous slide, actually, Sam. Yeah, there you go. And so basically to summarize the changes that we made, we deprecated the Protect stage and created the governance stage in its place. And we made a handful of team and scope changes that will organize us in a way that really lends itself better to providing this holistic solution. So those changes include moving the managed compliance group to the governance stage so that our security and compliance vision can be better aligned and executed with one another. Also, we moved the secure threat insights group to the governance stage. We created a new category called the dependency management category within governed threat insights. And the scope of that category includes portions of dependency scanning, or what was in dependency scanning and composition analysis. You can think of the new dependency management category as the piece of functionality that ingests dependency scanning data and findings, as well as the user-facing workflows. So both of these categories exist, but now mirror the same model that we have with the other secure analyzer groups. We also moved the container scanning category from Protect to composition analysis. We renamed the container security group to security policies and renamed security orchestration to security policy management. Next slide. So that's a lot to keep track of. So some visuals might help. This is the org structure that you all knew and loved before we made these changes. So you'll see that Threat Insights falls under secure here, and Protect had just the one group called container security. And then next slide. Now, after the changes, you see that Threat Insights and compliance have moved to govern, and we have the new security policy group. Next slide. This summarizes sort of how all of the categories fall out at the end of the day. I won't go through all of these in detail again, but this slide is here for your reference, just for a visual later. Next slide. Some important things to point out in terms of impact. What does this do for all of us? So the first thing to highlight is that these changes did not result in any deprecation of capabilities from the product. So even though the Protect stage no longer exists, we still offer the same product capabilities that existed under Protect. The main difference is just in which teams own and maintain those capabilities. So we still have container scanning and we still have security policies. Second, this change intentionally resulted in additional investment in security policies and vulnerability management, and generally gave us more capacity to focus on dependency scanning and dependency management as those key aspects of software supply chain security that I mentioned. Finally, this better aligned our compliance offerings with our security offerings, which is important because these disciplines and requirements often go hand in hand for our customers. I know there's a lot of content on organizational changes, but hopefully it was helpful. We'll be happy to take any questions that you have in our live Q&A on that. And with that, I will hand it off to Sam to get us started on recent product highlights and upcoming roadmap. Sam, over to you.
All right, so real quick before we dive in, we're going to be covering a number of roadmap items. And as always, any roadmap items that we cover are subject to change and are presented only for informational purposes. Just to highlight some of the things that we've done recently in composition analysis, we've expanded support for our both dependency scanner and our license scanner by adding support for Java 17. We've also added support for things like poetry.log files, and added support for Gradle 7 for the license scanning capability. Generally, we've been trying to minimize many of our investments, as particular in our license compliance solution, because we actually are planning to replace that with something considerably more advanced moving forward. So I want to really focus in on some of the big work that the team has been doing behind the scenes. Although we haven't had a ton of huge new features in the last 3 to 6 months, these underlying architectural changes are going to make some pretty big differences in our team's velocity moving forward and in the kinds of features and capabilities that we can deliver. So coming up, we have a couple features here that I'll highlight briefly before getting into the architectural rework. So first of all, we've been working on operational container scanning for quite a long time at this point. We're getting very close to delivering that as a general availability release. Also, we want to expand on some of the functionality we released in 15.1 to ignore NPM dependencies and to expand that to also be able to ignore Python dependencies, dev dependencies. The underlying architectural work that I was referring to involves changing our container scanning and dependency scanning analyzers to output a cyclone.dx formatted artifact file. Some of that work has already been done, so our dependency scanner can already output a file that's an SBOM. It's a cyclone.dx formatted file. But what we're introducing new is the ability to ingest that, store that into the database, and then also we want to bring in our proprietary GitLab advisory database into the GitLab Postgres backend, as well as some of the other database sources that we've been using, such as the Trivy database for vulnerabilities. Once we do that, we'll be able to introduce a new method of identifying vulnerabilities that happens in the Rails backend. And the benefit of doing it here instead of in the individual analyzers is that that job will be able to be run synchronously whenever we get new advisories that come into our database, or anytime that the dependencies change. So in the past, customers would typically schedule scans on a regular basis to keep their list of vulnerabilities up to date for the latest advisories. This means that they'll no longer need to do that going forward, because we'll be able to receive those new advisories and then automatically rescan everything that uses one of those components or one of those versions and update the vulnerabilities automatically. So it's really streamlines our workflow, and it opens the path to being able to do things like alerting when a new vulnerability is introduced in the default branch moving forward. Just to wrap it up with License Finder, I mentioned we're planning to replace that current solution. You'll notice in this diagram, there's no license scanning job over here in the CI pipeline. And that's because we already will have generated our list of dependencies just by running container and dependency scanning. And then we plan to develop and import a license database that will give us information mapping licenses to specific packages. Once again, we plan to do that matching job in the Rails backend synchronously on change, so that those licenses are always kept up to date with the latest information. And that will allow us to deprecate and remove our current license finder implementation of license finder. That'll be one less job that the customers have to run in their pipeline. With that, I will go ahead and hand it off to Connor to cover our SAST offerings.
Great, thanks, Dan. So my name is Connor Gilbert. I am the product manager for static analysis. That covers 3 categories: SAST, secret detection, and code quality. I call that IIC scanning separately as well, because it is a little bit different from the other ones. So I'll talk to each of those categories today, and the main highlights that we've had from the previous times and where we're going. So we did take a pause a little bit during the last few months to focus on bugs and customer issues. We do hope to have a better handle on those going forward, because we do maintain so many analyzers and so much service area with all the programming languages and all the types of things people could scan. We are investing in both proactive things to fix that, such as working on SEMGRET-based scanning, as well as reactive bug fixes, that type of thing. So some key highlights from the past 6 months or so. Really excited about new SEMGRET-based scanning for Java. As a reminder, when we convert from an existing open source analyzer to SemGrep. That means that we have taken a look at all the rules, evaluated them, translated them over. So we have nearly equivalent coverage. We've tested them, we've maintained them. This is in collaboration with our vulnerability research team. The result of this is that Java scanning now no longer requires a build, which is the main source of customer issues for SaaS, and runs about 7 to 8 times faster. Jobs going from 40 minutes down to 5, for instance. As part of this, we also do have some coverage for a number of other languages, and we've offered an opt-in preview for that for the past 4 releases or so, as we work to actually remove those other analyzers. That's the main focus in SaaS, is really giving a consistent and easier customer experience through consolidation. Secret detection, real highlight is reducing scan time by 50 to 75% through a new rule structure. That helps us look for specific kinds of patterns before we do the expensive matching and really improves performance on large diffs. With IIT scanning, that's a recently introduced offering. So we have had really great uptake both internally and externally. And that means that there have been some customer issues. So we've been looking at resolving those directly and also improving what I call the DIY debugging experience. So giving more information in the log when something fails, making sure that we're giving customers the ability to self-remediate if they can before they have to raise a support ticket or come up with an issue. Finally, for code quality is a recent addition to the section. And as part of reevaluating the technology that was used for it, or that is used for it, we have completed UX research to validate what people are looking for in their code quality solutions. That is helping us define a new scanning system, which we will be focusing on in the coming months. We also have updated the MR widget to match the new framework and refined the inline diff views. This is a really cool feature where you can see the actual code quality findings while you're reviewing a merge request. So you can see the problems right there as a reviewer or as an author. We can move on to moving forward. And for this, I'll cover all the categories again. So just more on SaaS, working for more SemGrep-based scanning conversion. So again, that's taking the existing analyzer, looking at the rules and converting them over, making sure we have defensible coverage that we stand behind. The first priority languages are C# and Scala. PHP and Node.js are the likely next candidates, but we welcome feedback on that, especially from customers who are actively using SaaS today. We will be looking at expanding our proprietary technology, so that's called VET, into release product features. So we've been investing in new language front ends and working on the platform there, and want to surface that more throughout the product. We'll be applying the code quality inline diff view to SaaS findings. This may take a little while, but that is our main focus on the UI side. Now for secret detection, we're nearly there with a feature, including some community contributions, automatically revoke GitLab tokens when they're exposed. So on GitLab.com, if we detect a GitLab token, we can automatically send it in for remediation so that it's revoked and it's no longer a threat to the instance. We are also directionally looking to cover more of GitLab beyond just code bases and also protect users by default without having to require opt-in in a pipeline. For IAC scanning, the main visible change will be around rules. We understand that new rules are appearing in different versions and want to make sure that we have a handle on that experience for customers. We've done some recent improvements there to remove, for instance, some duplicative secret detection rules there. And for code quality, the main focus is going to be delivering that new scan ingestion system. The details will be fleshed out as we come through technical architecture and define what's possible, matching that up with our UX research findings. So a lot of really exciting stuff across all of the categories and product offerings in static analysis, but that's the main direction that we're heading toward. I'll now pass off to Derek for dynamic analysis.
Awesome. Thank you, Connor. So I'm Derek Ferguson. I'll be going over the dynamic analysis area. So what we did in the last 6 months, the first thing to point out is that we reached complete maturity for DAST. We think that where we are right now with the addition of aggregated DAST findings and reduction of false positives, we are in a place where we can call it complete, and we're working on attaining the next level of maturity, which would be lovable. So looking forward, we'll be working on things to improve that. Looking at what we've done with the DAST configuration UI, we redesigned it to make it easier to create profiles for both on-demand scans and CI/CD scans. So you can create those profiles in line rather than having to jump over to multiple different pages to create them and then add them to your scans. We also have been working on our browser-based DAST functionality. We delivered all of the passive vulnerability checks that we'll be doing for the first release, for the RGA release, and we have moved on to the active checks. So all of those are available now for our opt-in beta that we are running. We added the crawl graph artifact, so we can show you on an SVG artifact what we have crawled on your application so that you can see what coverage your DAST test has on your website. And then we also added some improvements around authentication, adding in some different types of authentication, basic and digest authentication, as well as fixing a bunch of bugs and performance improvements. Moving on to API security, we've really been focused on speeding up the scan time for API security. We're now in a place where we are able to take advantage of runners that have multiple CPUs assigned to them and spreading the test across multiple CPUs so that we can run a whole lot faster. We've gotten speeds 4 to 5 times what we had before, depending on the number of CPUs that are added to the runner. And then we also created a FIPS compliant API security image. For coverage guided fuzzing, we added corpus management to help with future testing. So when you do run a coverage guided fuzz test, it will automatically upload the corpus to this management UI so that you can easily update those and keep track of what's going on with your coverage guided fuzz tests. All right, looking at what we have coming up in the roadmap for DAST, we are going to be focused completely on browser-based DAST. We have been working on the active vulnerability checks. Once all of those are ready for use, then we'll move on to cleaning up a few things so that we can GA browser-based DAST. For API security, right now we're working on delivering GraphQL schema support so that we can automatically look at your GraphQL APIs rather than having a Postman collection or HAR file required to define those tests. And then we'll be going into our first foray into auto discovery for APIs by looking at Java Spring Boot REST APIs and auto generating the open API spec for those so that you don't actually have to do anything to configure those tests. And then for on-demand testing, we will be redesigning the profile library so that we can support additional types of tests. And the first thing that we'll be looking at with that will be splitting off the DAST API tests into their own, which we'll also be using the new API security engine for, and then also adding API fuzz testing into on-demand. All right, and with that, I will hand it over to Matt.
Great, thanks, Derek. So for the newly renamed Govern Thread Insight section, over the last 6 months, we had 2 large features that are worth reiterating, calling attention to. So the first is manually creating a vulnerability record. Now, this work was actually split into 2 parts. The first was a new GraphQL mutation that allowed programmatically creating a vulnerability record on any project in your instance to which you have access. We leveraged that work to build on top of it a UI inside of the vulnerability report, which is basically just a simple form where you can report a vulnerability manually. This was really an important step for us because it does 2 things. Number one, it decouples vulnerability record information from always having to be the result of a CI job or running from an automated scanner. So it opens up possibilities like pulling in things from bug bounty programs, or you could enter the results of a manual pen test, for instance. The other thing that it does for us is it continues to leverage what we've already got in vulnerability management today as the single source of truth for all risk that we've located in the application. So it's now scanners plus any other sources that you can pull in. The workflows are the same. The only change is the source of that information. The other big feature was security integrated security training. So we launched this a few months ago with 2 different training vendor partners, Contra and Secure Code Warrior. What this does is it puts a link to a highly targeted micro lesson, if you will, usually about 5 minutes or so, an exercise that's targeted both to the type of vulnerability found, as well as the language in which it was detected. So we're providing this highly context relevant training option for developers, even security professionals who may not know what to do when they see the result from one of our analyzers. So this is a great way to not just keep the shift left momentum inside of your organization, but to actually empower that shift left. And then the majority of our focus has actually been on stability and other what we're calling enterprise readiness. So some of these are bugs, but a lot more of this is about maintaining the scale at which we're seeing the utilization of our security tools. So over the past year, we've seen an explosion of uptake on both our SaaS offering, as well as the size of some of the self-managed instances. We're re-architecting to make sure that we can not just maintain what we've got today, but scale into the future. And this is also going to unlock a lot of opportunities for us to expand on our feature sets more rapidly as well. Ready to talk about what's coming next? So over the next 6 months, the 2 main areas of focus are going to be auto-resolving of vulnerabilities and then advanced filtering. The auto-resolve is adding an automation piece to what you can already do in the product today. So when our analyzers run and they find a vulnerability that existed in your main branch, but it no longer exists in a feature branch, we'll actually mark that as no longer detected. Now, that requires a manual intervention today by a person. They would have to go in and change the status to resolve either individually or through a bulk action. This is going to leverage our existing scan result policy builder and create a new policy type. So this will allow control over where and when you want to automatically mark as resolved vulnerabilities once our analyzers say that they're no longer detected in the code base. So we think this is going to be huge operational time savings for teams triaging vulnerabilities. On the enhanced vulnerability filtering side, this is building what we've got today on the vulnerability report in terms of filters and adding a lot more criteria as well as flexibility in the construction of actual queries instead of just on-off filters. Some of the examples of additional criteria include things like identifier filtering, filtering by a particular file or an image like a container image, and then drilling down to the individual tool level. So right now we'll show you categories of tools, say static analysis. You could actually pick specifically the semgrep analyzer. And this is also going to lay the groundwork for what we eventually hope to be a search plus filter experience, very similar to what you get in issues and MR lists today. I'm going to pass it to myself for dependency management. All right, so this is a new category, not a lot to be shown here yet. If you are familiar with our existing vulnerability management capabilities, a lot of what we're talking about here are going to be analogous. So the first area of focus is going to be taking the project level dependency lists we've got today and making those available in subgroups and the group levels. So again, much like the vulnerability reports, rolling up the dependencies so that you can have a top-down view of everything inside of your instance and giving that kind of single source of visibility. Also very important, adding search and filtering capabilities. So you can imagine as you start to aggregate dependencies up, the higher you go, the more you're going to have to sort of look through. So that's going to be really key to the usability of that. But it also unlocks things like discovery goals. Like, for instance, in that last example there, if I want to answer the question, show me all of the dependencies across my entire GitLab instance where I have log4j potentially, we'll be able to answer questions like that. And that's all we've got for now. So I'll pass it off to Sam White to take us home.
All right, so with the security policies group, we have been hard at work. We added scan result policies in 14.8, which replaced the previous capability of vulnerability check. And in 14.9, we added in a rule mode to make it easier for users to edit those policies in the UI without having to learn the specific YAML syntax of their policy editor. We've followed that up with a number of UX updates. We've also streamlined it with the ability to view those policies in the merge request settings, so that way you can still see all of your merge request approvals in one place without having to go out to the security policy editor. On the scan execution side of things, we've added in group scan execution policies in 15.2, and we've added in the ability to have some interactive inline policy validation as you're editing the YAML for these security policies. Going forward, we plan on continuing to expand on what we have by introducing scan result policies at the group level. We hear that very heavily requested, and we're hard at work making that possible. We're also in the middle of building out a rule mode for scan execution policies as well, which is what you see a prototype of here in the screenshot, showing how we'll be able to provide an editor for you to create these policies without having to learn that YAML. Also going forward, we plan to create a new kind of a policy called a license approval policy. This will basically be another version of what currently is a scan result policy, but the intention is that this will be able to replace what we have today with license check. And just like when we replaced vulnerability check with scan policies, we anticipate that this is going to add a lot of additional features for users, such as the ability to gate their policies with a two-step approval process, have a full change log of all changes made to the policies, and also the ability to have separation of duties so that users can manage those policies with only the security and compliance teams instead of letting the developers also change those rules. Also going forward, we plan to add support for dependency scanning. Right now, that's not an option in your scan execution policies. Support for role, I can't talk today, but role-based approvers, so that you can allow all maintainers or all developers to approve a merge request when certain criteria is met. And then we also plan to expand out our scan result policies to add in a number of additional filters specific to user needs, things like based off of the age of a vulnerability, how long ago it was initially reported, or other criteria like that, just to allow for more fine-grained criteria that triggers those approvals. And then lastly, we plan to give users the ability to limit group policies to only apply to projects that have a specified compliance framework label, whereas those apply to all projects by default. So again, with the increased investment here, we plan to expand out our security policy editor rather significantly going forward. With that, I'll turn it back over to Hillary.
Thanks, Sam. And thanks so much to everyone who took the time out to watch this video. And we look forward to chatting with you in our live Q&A. Thanks.